Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches Poetry. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at Half-caste by John Agard. It's a cracking poem which is all about challenging racial stereotypes and discrimination, particularly focusing on the use of the derogatory term half-caste when describing people of mixed race. The poet, John Agard, is originally from Guyana in the Caribbean, although he moved over to the UK in the 70s. His father was Afro-Caribbean and his mother was Portuguese. A lot of his poetry is written phonetically, and you'll notice that about this poem, which is all about creating voices and creating dialect. And he does deal with notions of identity and culture in his work. He's married to Grace Nichols, who's another poet that you'll probably come across in your GCSE studies. I think we should just get cracking with this poem. The one thing I will say to you is it is worth listening to a recording of it. There are loads of recordings of him reading the poem. It's definitely worth doing it. But for now, let's get started with our analysis. Okay, so the poem starts in direct address. You'll notice that he's talking directly to his listener or his reader, depending on how you sort of receive this poem. Excuse me, standing on one leg, I'm half-caste. Now, this image of standing on one leg is meant to be the notion of incompleteness. So he's mocking the use of the phrase half-caste, suggesting it means half done. And the use of excuse me, now this is actually like a politeness form when you say excuse me. It's when you're asking for pardon, really. But obviously this is a mocking tone because he's not asking for forgiveness for being incomplete. He's mocking those that would view him as such. And then we move into this declarative sentence, I'm half-caste, i.e. he's using this insult that is used to describe him, this derogatory term, because if you think about the word caste, it actually has a variety of different meanings. So caste can mean put together, so like you cast pottery. It is part of also, when you think of caste with an E, the caste system is a segregation system. And then you can also like cast as in throw, cast shadows. So you can see how by being half-caste, the suggestion is that you're half made up, half put together, which makes sense with this mocking kind of declarative. I'm, standing on one leg. Do excuse the fact that I'm standing on one leg. I can't help it. I'm half-caste. So it sets out this kind of mocking tone. We then have further direct address, and we're really, really strongly using imperatives here. Explain yourself. Yeah, so it's demanding explanation. It's challenging the reader, listener. If you're going to use this word, you need to explain to me why. And notice what we have here is we've got this shift from SE, or otherwise known as Standard English, to dialect, explain yourself. So when you have the U instead of OU and missing off the T, it's spelled phonetically so that you read it or you hear it in his voice, in his dialect, how he sounds. And this is all about creating a sense of authority and validation with this aspect of his identity about who he is and where he comes from. Explain yourself what you mean when you say half-caste. So still direct address, like I said, but now we've got the focus is being put on the listener or the reader, yeah? Like what they have to do. The tone, therefore, becomes quite challenging. There is something quite confrontational about the tone. And then he goes on to explain with the first of three comparative allusions. Okay, so here he's alluding to the famous artist Picasso. You mean when Picasso mixed red and green as a half-caste canvas? So this rhetorical question builds to this like mocking tone. It's metaphorical as well, or even personification if you think about how that word is usually used. But he's using images of beauty, making comparisons of things that you would never question. You'd never say that a Picasso painting is incomplete because it's mixed more than one colour together. So why would you use that term to describe a human? That's where the challenge is. And then it continues. So note that actually this bit becomes a refrain. Yeah, so it's a repeated section of lines. Explain yourself what you mean when you say half-caste. So this repetition, this refrain builds momentum, starts to build a little bit of kind of emphasis on the argument. And again, there's a sense of, you know, this challenge. If you're not listening, I'm going to say it again to you. Now, last time we had an allusion to art. Now we have to nature. You mean when light and shadow mix into sky is a half-caste weather. So again, note that we've got this juxtaposition between light and dark. So again, thinking about the idea of contrasts. And we're repeating this verb mix. So again, this notion of two things coming together that are quite different. That's what happens in weather, but you're not going to call weather half-caste. Again, rhetorical question. So we're using repetitive forms to enhance and strengthen the argument. And again, it creates a metaphor or personification, the idea of the half-caste weather. Now he develops his argument and we get more of a humorous tone. So it softens some of the challenge. In that case, England weather nearly always half-caste. In fact, some of them, I can't say this, some of them cloud half-caste till them overcast. So what we have is this play on words, the repetition of cast, half-caste, to overcast, and overcast is obviously associated with the weather. And then he personifies the clouds. So spiteful dem want the sun to pass. So he's saying, all right, black and white in the sky, this is weather. Well, England, it's always like that, to the point where it feels a little bit like the clouds are being spiteful, not letting the sun to come out. So that's how the personification works. But one could argue that this introduction to the notion of spite is a reminder of how this word half-caste is used, the spite in the intentions of the people that use this word to describe people that are mixed race. And then we have this West Indian slang, arras. So you could argue here that this is a little bit of a shift in tone. It means my arse. That's what it kind of translates to. So he's moved from this kind of like sort of humorous tone, and then perhaps here this builds to more frustration and perhaps anger, especially if you think of it in conjunction with this adjective spiteful through that personification of clouds. We get the repeated refrain once more, so continuing to build that momentum, to continue to build that argument. Also, it could be kind of hinting to the idea that you're not getting an answer, that Agard's not getting an answer, or the narrator isn't getting an answer, so he asks the question again. No, explain yourself. We've got our final comparison, and here we have an allusion to music, so a different art form. So notice all three things are associated with beauty: art, nature, music, and skill as well. You mean Tchaikovsky, very famous composer, sit down at the piano and mix a black key with a white key is a half-caste symphony. So we've got the same sort of repetition coming through, the same repetitive structures. Now we've gone from red and grey to light and shadow, and now black and white. So the language and the colour symbolism is starting to kind of perhaps relate more directly to race here. And again, we've got the same rhetorical question and metaphor at the end. So these comparisons mock the notion that you would call a person half-caste by saying you would never say it in relation to these other beautiful creations that happen to mix different things together. Okay, slight kind of shift in the argument now. We move away from the comparisons. Now what's interesting, we've got that repeated refrain, but notice that it's slightly shorter. He cuts out that third line, yeah, the when you say half-caste. So explain yourself what you mean. So it's slightly blunter. I'm listening to you with the keen half of me ear, and looking at you with the keen half of me eye. Notice this adjective keen. It suggests a real willingness, and it suggests an intensity. And he's saying, I'm here, yeah? I'm listening to you. I want to understand where you're coming from as well. But we also have this repetition and this anaphoric structure Okay, so we've got half of me ear, half of me eye. So notice it's very, very sensory. It's about taking in, but he's still using these images of incompletion. Half an ear, half an eye. And when I'm introduced to you, I'm sure you'll understand why I offer you half a hand. So further repetition. So ear, eye, hand. And when I sleep at night, I close half an eye. So notice how these anaphoric structures are used all the way through. And what you're starting to see is a blend of standard English and dialect here. So phrases like, I'm sure you'll understand why I offer. It's all quite formal, and then it's mixed with a dialect, perhaps representing that as this part of the poem develops, there is a suggestion of better understanding between people. Perhaps. And the anaphoric structure also becomes a kind of listing. When I do this, this happens. When I do this, this happens. Now, I'm quite interested in this line here. And when I sleep at night, I close half an eye. Because obviously it fits in with the structure that has been building. Again, him sort of, you know, pointing out the way that other people perceive him, and then he's sort of using that language and kind of claiming it. But when you talk about sleeping with one eye open, it normally suggests fear. So it could be drawing upon the fear that comes with discrimination and racial discrimination and being a victim of racial discrimination. What I also think is interesting is the way that he reframes this insult, because he uses ideas and images that are quite mundane. Do you know what I mean? Listening, looking, shaking a hand. It's all very normal, but then he pairs it with this incongruous image of being half done, half an ear, half an eye, half an hand, half a hand, half a dream. So there's a sort of incongruity to that yeah, it reframes the insult. It makes it ridiculous. Yeah, so again, a very kind of powerful way of saying you shouldn't be using this word. And then the tone shifts slightly, becomes a little bit more miracle. And when moon begin to glow, I half cast human being, cast half a shadow. Note again the way that he's using this term. I, half cast human being. Yeah, that's what you're saying. So I cast half a shadow. We've got this repetition. We've got this play on words. Notice homonymic pun here between cast and then casting a shadow, which is like throwing or projecting a shadow. And there's something quite interesting about that imagery, because it's both lyrical and quite beautiful, the idea of the moon glowing, but there's also something sinister about it. Perhaps he is referring to the way that some people demonize people who are different or from different places, that sort of sense of xenophobia, so this idea about being in the shadows. And then we get another shift in tone. You must come back. Check out that modal verb. It's a modal verb of absolute certainty. It's obligation. You have to do it. You must come back tomorrow with the whole of your eye and the whole of your ear and the whole of your mind. So we've got this shift back to direct address, and now the images are juxtaposed. So when he's talking about the you, the listener, the reader, he's saying, well, you're going to come here with everything, aren't you? The whole of your eye, your ear, your mind. And this is actually saying, now that you understand what I'm talking about, yeah, now that you're understanding the stereotypes that I'm drawing attention to, that I'm drawing attention to, you can start to be a bit more open-minded and you can start to see it fully. And when you're ready to do that, again, notice anaphoric structure, but when you're ready to do that, I will tell you the other half of my story. So we've got this really wonderful cohesion that demonstrates that completeness. It's like when you're ready to accept what I'm saying to you about stereotypes and the way people use language, then you're ready to hear that I am so much more than this little part of me. Race is just one tiny part of me. I've got this whole other world and this whole other story ready to tell you. Such a cool poem. Couple of notes on form. Form's, again, great to talk about in this poem. It's obviously in free verse, yeah? There's no rhythm rhyme structure. I like the way that the opening and the closing stanzas are really short and blunt, and then the rest of the poem is more developed, much longer stanzas. Obviously, you've got the phonetic spellings to create the dialect, which is so worthy of talking about, because again, it's all about that notion of identity and who you are. Now, tone-wise, conversation and that confrontational tone is being developed through that enjambment, through that lack of punctuation. At times it does sound angry. I think that is the point. At times it does sound confrontational, and I think it's really, really, really clearly about trying to create the voice of Agard and the voice of the narrator, to help his readers, combine those two words, understand why language hurts, is powerful, and needs to be considered before use. Okay, that's it from me. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that was useful. Do subscribe if it was, because then you'll get access to, or you'll get notifications of when all the other videos are out there. Do have a look on my playlists to see what else is there to help you with your GCSEs. But for now, that's it from me. Thank you so much. Happy revising.